I was out just infiltrating Antifa. I mean, I'll just tell you, I wanted to know what we were really dealing with. So I got on this call, and in this call, you hear all this fascist, all this stuff that's kind of going on and going back and forth. It's like a swirling of rhetoric. And so I listened for a while, and then somebody named Eric came on and started talking. And so he's talking about what they need to do next. And you need to make sure that you hold on to, fortify, and that we need to, add constant pressure and so on and so forth. And so as he starts to talk, someone says, "Who's Eric?" And then someone answers, "Eric is the Dominion guy." So obviously I'm taking notes, right? And I'm a copious note taker. So I took these notes, and so then Eric responds, keeps speaking, and then someone interrupts and says, "What are we going to do if effing Trump wins?" And he responds with, "Don't worry about the election. Trump is not going to win. I made effing sure of that. Ha ha ha." And so I did the research on Eric. And so it was really simple. This is what I did, right? I put in Eric into Google search, Eric Dominion, Denver, Colorado. Not very clever, right? I mean, that's how it all started.
Oh boy. Here we go.
Here we go.
What do we have today?
Of course, there's always stories about election stuff going on right now as the 2020 election is heavily contested. One more of the casualties of this election is somebody named Eric Coomer. And Eric Coomer is just a guy who was in the wrong place, wrong time. Well, not really the wrong place. He just had the wrong name, and he got thrown into this. He did not want to be put out there at all either, but he is now suing. The story is there's a guy named Joe Oltmann. Joe Oltmann lives in Colorado, and he was very active in the sort of right-wing community of people and activists in Colorado during Trump's time. He says a lot of times that he's really not that politically active, but he has a podcast. It's called Conservative Daily Podcast. So I'm like, well, at some point you got very actively involved. And it says that he started getting attacked by journalists in Colorado. And the journalists were writing bad articles about him. They were doxing him, is what he said. But he's a public figure. So he has, if you Google him, he's all over the place. And he has a website, he has a radio show, he has all this stuff.
I'm going to ask you this question a lot of times just for people that are just tuning in. But what is doxing?
So doxing is when certain people find your name, your address, your phone number, where you work. One example that often comes to mind is somebody who's says something inappropriate or does something inappropriate, and so everybody screen grabs that, and you can put it on Yelp on their business page, and then their business manager will see it, or their boss will see it and probably fire them out of pressure to fire them. So that's kind of a minor example of how it happens, but these are bigger ones. These are where it's such a big deal that these guys are getting death threats.
Wow.
But this guy, Eric Coomer, he's like in hiding. He can't let anybody know where he is. So these elevate to this high level. So Joe Oltmann has been, he claims, doxxed at this point. And so in retaliation, he goes and starts what he calls infiltrating Antifa meetings, because he's convinced that these people are Antifa. So Antifa is the name of a group that they call themselves like anti-fascists and Antifa. Other people would call them a domestic terrorist group. The FBI doesn't classify them that way. They just say it's kind of more of a movement than anything. But a lot of right-wing groups think that Antifa is a specific group of people and they have a organized movement. So he was trying to infiltrate meetings with Antifa, fully convinced that a lot of the journalists that were doxing him were Antifa. So he was trying to out them. So he's like, I'm going to infiltrate these meetings. I'm going to write down their names. I'm going to Google them. And I'm going to say, see, they're Antifa. Obviously, that's why they're doxing me. They're they're bad people, basically, because they think Antifa is just the enemy. So in one of these meetings in September, like mid to late September, he hears somebody come on and start talking in this meeting. And apparently he is probably on some sort of Zoom or conference call, he calls it, and they don't know he's on the call. So he hears in the conversation somebody say something, and somebody goes, "Who's that?" And he says, "I'm Eric." And they said, "Eric who?" And he said, "I'm Eric from Dominion." So Joe writes that name down. Okay, Eric from Dominion, what's this about? Right. And then he hears them talking, and somebody says, "Well, what happens if Trump wins the election?" And Eric says, "Oh, that won't happen. I've made effing sure of that." So Joe at that time, this is September, late September. Okay. He remembers this. He writes it down. He says he'd take lots of notes. So he wrote this all down. So he doesn't do much with it, except he immediately Googles it. Eric Dominion, Denver, Colorado. That's all he knows, is that this person's.
So what is the Dominion?
Right. So when he Googles it, he finds that Dominion is a name for Dominion voting systems, or so he thinks. He documented all this when he searched what he saw, because he signed an affidavit for all this. He said, when I Google searched it, the first few searches that came up were, nothing with Eric and Dominion except Dominion voting systems. So if you've heard it all, Dominion is the name of a company who basically runs the voting. They do build these tabulators for the states. It helps them count faster. So you stick the papers in there and you run them through, and they tick, 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 and count them. Or they're the things that people use when they go vote. If you've ever voted on an electronic voting machine, you go in and you put your vote in, and it prints out a piece of paper for you, and you give it to them. So Dominion now, even without Joe Oltmann, was part of this big controversy, because they have been sort of attacked over the years. But for some reason, this Joe Oltmann really took to this Eric person. So when he Googled Dominion, he found that there was a person named Eric Coomer, and he was the director of strategy and security at Dominion. And that just freaked him out. Right. Well, actually, I think at the time he says he didn't think anything of it. I would think you would think something of it at that time if somebody said something like that and they were part of a voting systems, but he claims he didn't think anything of it at the time. Election happens, and then he says on November 6th, which was a few days after the election, they were about to call it for Biden. He gets a text message from a friend about the voting systems in Georgia again. Poor Georgia.
Right? Yeah, it's just been a nightmare for them.
Oh, poor Georgia. So anyway, he gets this article, and he's reading through it about there's glitches in the system, in the Dominion system, glitches, right? And so he's pissed off, and he's reading. And at the bottom it says, and Eric Coomer from Dominion clarified the glitches. And he went, oh my gosh. Remembered the name, remembered the conversation that he heard about Trump he's going to make sure Trump doesn't effing win. And goes on a data finding, doxing, basically frenzy on this guy. He finds, because Joe Oltmann claims he works as a business consultant for data. So then he's like, I'm a data guy. I just went and found everything I could about him. He went to his Facebook. He went to everywhere. Specifically his Facebook, though, he got into it somehow. He says legally, got into it, was reading all of these things that Eric Coomer had posted. And Eric Coomer's personal Facebook page is not very Trump friendly. It's definitely, he did post like the Antifa manifesto and all this stuff.
Sure.
But in Joe's mind, that meant this guy did it, and he truly believes that. He believes, I heard this thing, I heard him say this, but it wasn't Eric Coomer. Or who knows what Eric it was. Eric Coomer is suing Joe Oltmann now because Joe Oltmann went on to like a bunch of news networks and told this story. So I've heard the story 3 or 4 times.
Right.
And he tells the same story. And he then eventually this story got put into the affidavits that were sent out through all of the election stuff with where they're trying to sue all the states. And he signed an affidavit saying, this happened to me, and I heard this guy, overheard him saying he was going to throw the election. And the judges are like, yeah, but you don't know if that's the right Eric. You don't have no idea if that was the Eric who said it. And he's like, well, it doesn't matter because look, I found his Facebook page, and look, he's obviously an anti-Trumper and he runs the election systems, and that's not fair. So therefore. So they have been spreading this Eric Coomer's name now everywhere. They found where he lived. They took a screenshot of where he lived with his truck out front, and they sent that out on the internet. They sent his name. They started harassing him. They started harassing his family and his coworkers. And
wow.
So he totally went into hiding. No idea where he is. But Eric has come out against this and is trying to speak out against it. And he actually had enough support and money somehow to actually sue them.
Wow.
So he's suing not just Joe Oltmann, but he is suing a couple conservatives who did this interview with him and didn't even think to question this story and say,
right.
Well, how did you know it was Eric from Dominion? You just heard Eric, Dominion, and that's it. And you put it together, and all of a sudden this guy is trying to, commit massive election fraud. So he went on all these interviews, and in those interviews were picked up, of course, by Trump and his sons. I think Eric Trump posted it. And so there's a lawsuit out right now from Eric Coomer that details every single step of the way and how this kept growing bigger and bigger and bigger, and how eventually Trump, with his 80 million, people, even kicked it out there.
On notice, Dominion Voting Systems sending letters to both White House counsel Pat Cipollone and President Trump's personal attorney Rudy Giuliani to keep all records related to the baseless claims that their voting machines changed votes to help Joe Biden win. Why, may you ask? Because the company says that legal action against Giuliani is, quote, imminent. This, as a top executive with Dominion, is now suing the Trump campaign and allies, including Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell. The lawsuit saying this, in part, defendants knowingly circulated and amplified a baseless conspiracy theory to challenge the integrity of the presidential election. While this theory has been thoroughly rejected, its immediate and life-threatening effects remain very real. Out front with me now, the man behind that lawsuit, Eric Coomer. He is Dominion's Director of Product Strategy and Security. Eric, thank you for coming on. First, I do need to say that there is no evidence that you or your company did anything to manipulate or steal any election. But for a month now, you have had to be in hiding. We are not revealing your location for security reasons. Can you describe what these conspiracy theories and disinformation surrounding you and your company have done to your life?
Thank you, Kate, and good evening. Thanks for having me on. To put it briefly, what I've experienced over the last 6 weeks has been a complete upheaval of my life. As you mentioned, I have been in hiding in a secure location. I have not been able to return to my normal life since all of these baseless accusations came out. I'm currently, for security reasons for both myself and my colleagues, I am currently on leave from my position, so I'm not working. I'm still employed with the company, but I am on leave due to the security concerns. So it has been, again, a complete upheaval of my day-to-day life.
And this is because, as I understand it, you've been receiving death threats daily, threats to your family, threats to your colleagues. And it all started really just days after the election. An activist out of Colorado accusing you and the company of being in some scheme to make sure that Trump wouldn't win. And I want to give you the opportunity and ask you for the record, Eric, have you been involved in changing any votes, deleting any votes, or impacting any votes, or even being on phone calls about doing so?
Never. I've never even joked about influencing election. I've done this for 15 years, and I do it because I really believe in the democratic process. And it's not a joking matter. And even if I wanted to, there's no way for me to manipulate those votes. I don't have access to state and county election systems during an election. I've never written a single line of code that's used in Dominion's product that's out in the field. And again, I have never made any statements, even joking to friends, families, or loved ones about influencing the election. And to be clear, I am in hiding because I have received many death threats, and it's on a continuing basis. My entire family, their private information has been published online in what's referred to as doxing. All of my private information has been released online. People have taken photos of my house. People have threatened to come by and lynch me, decapitate me. They've referred to me as a traitor. And it is not safe for me to, go about my daily life. And, even my father has received harassing letters to his home.
So Eric details in his court case, in his, he's trying to sue here. He says that there's been harm to him, and this is the harm that has been caused. So there's a picture spread around of him, of his face. And it says, "Meet Eric Coomer, Dominion Voting Systems Chief Officer of Strategy and Security." And then it requotes that line, "Don't worry about the election. Trump's not going to win. I made effing sure of that." And some of the responses among the hundreds of people who responded to this post were, "Fucking maggot. Most wanted. Live to testify. Report if you know his whereabouts. Report any sightseeing of him. But I think he's going to hide in Venezuela."
Wow.
Yeah, there was a whole connection with Venezuela and Hugo Chavez.
Wow.
A fun part of the story. Yeah. If this man disenfranchised people of their votes, he deserves worse than life in prison. He disenfranchised millions of people's voting rights. Wars are fought over that. He deserves everything he gets. A good mugshot for USA's top 10 terrorist list, wanted, dead or alive. And this man will be dead within 2 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. So given the flood of negative publicity, including death threats, Dominion was forced to alter its website and attempted to correct the numerous falsehoods. So you go there, there's splash pages that say no. And I think it's disturbing, too, that they're going after the employees of Dominion as though somehow they were all involved. So that's why he can't even work there anymore, too, is because he's putting their lives in danger.
Yeah. I mean, it's everybody at that point. That's why I'm saying, these are just career-ending stories.
Yeah. Dominion employees are being forced to retreat from their lives due to personal safety concerns, not only for our employees, but also for their extended families.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's how far this goes. It's so dangerous.
It is so dangerous. They put $1 million reward out there for him. Calls for his capture and arrest have spread rapidly. The $1 million reward that has been posted for the information leading to the whereabouts and capture of Eric Coomer. That was the day before Thanksgiving.
Wow.
Threats grew more intense and specific. For example, on November 25th, Twitter user said, "Dear Salida, Colorado," which is where his lawyer is in Salida. So they assume he's somewhere near there. "We have rented a house in your town for as long as it takes to find Eric Coomer. We will disrupt that town until found. Pedal pushers racing will no longer have peace."
Oh my God. I have been to that town. And I love Salida. It's such a beautiful, cute little town. There's a lot of artists that live there. Oh, what a mess. So now we're going to destroy people's lives and towns.
Right. We're going to just, take down this town. Yeah. And they're starting to personally text him, "What's the penalty for treason?" And one of them just said, "Run." That scares me. That would scare me.
Yep.
So this Joe Oltmann guy too, I mean, he really, really did it he really did so much of it. He just said, Eric, you're a traitor. We're coming for you and your shitbag company. We're coming for Antifa. We're coming for your politician friends. Share this. Share his name. If they certify the electors today after this audit, we have an obligation to forcibly remove them all. This is not a drill. Our country is not their evil playground. God is at the wheel. But we are the warriors that must do the work of men to repel evil. These people are evil, and they are liars, cheats, and thieves out to take what they did not earn or deserve. Where will you stand?
Wow.
Can you imagine somebody saying that about you?
That would be pretty horrible.
Very, very scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, another casualty of Trump sending out these false tweets and ruining these people's lives.
Yeah. So now, so this Eric guy, did he work for Dominion? Like, was he a worker there?
Yes. So he is actually one of the earlier employees. He's worked there for like 15 years, for a really long time. He does work there. In the lawsuit, though, he says, when you say Eric from Dominion, it could have been Eric from any Dominion. There's lots of Dominions named, like Old Dominion, railroads. There's quite a few Dominion named things in Denver. So it could have been anybody, any Eric. And the good news is that because of this lawsuit, he's suing Trump. He's suing Sidney Powell, that lawyer. He's suing Newsmax, OAN, a bunch of them. And Fox News, I think, even. Fox News came out and retracted. They were like, we have no evidence, none, that Dominion had anything to do with this. And it's because they're smart and they know they aren't going to win this. They have no evidence.
Right.
Some of the other news sources are still pushing it, including Trump. And even during that call, the Georgia elections. So this is the phone call that Trump made a while ago. And he's trying to convince the Georgia elections officials to overturn the election. And in it, he says something about Dominion. And the elections officials are like, well, we're not talking about Dominion, right? Like, we know we don't want to get sued here. And Trump's like, no, we are still talking about Dominion. Dominion still is a big problem. We need to figure this out. And his lawyers and people around him are kind of like, okay, but let's not get sued, So this actually works when you have money.
Right.
You can sue people, but not everybody can.
No, and I'm sure we'll see a lot more of, unfortunately, the other side, where there's a lot of people that are just victims of all this bullshit and they don't have the money to fight all this crap.
Yep.
Which is really sad and terrible. Because, I mean, it's like that would be terrible, to go through for anybody. Like, people know where you live. They know where you work. Like, you would probably have to get let go of your job because, like, the companies are going to be like, we can't have this person here. It's too much bad press for us. So it's like, and, some of these people, I'm sure, depending on the situation, they've had to work years to get to where they are in their company. And if this happened to them, they'd be totally screwed the rest of their life.
So that's a lot of what he says in the case, and which is why he has probably one of the best cases, is that he's actually suing for defamation because this will destroy his career. He will never be able to work. I don't, the CEO of Dominion has said he's not the CEO. The CEO of Dominion has sued as well. There's a whole case that they've threatened to sue. And so this is why everybody's backing off. But he came in and he sat down and answered every freaking question they had for hours and hours at all of these hearings. And they're still not happy. They still think they magically switched the votes somehow, wrote some sort of line of code and flipped them all to Biden. Yeah, he says he still works for the company, but not really. Like, his name's not on the website anymore, and he may be getting paid, but like administrative leave or something,
Yeah.
But to have to go into complete hiding, I don't know, freaks me out. That freaks me out to think about. going
Right.
into complete hiding, having to go into complete hiding because you're getting death threats and people telling you you're evil and you're vile and you're a terrible person because you're doing your job.
Right.
And nobody has any evidence. Every time I dive deep into these, there's nothing. It's just they've been debunked and debunked and debunked. And I even hear the people saying, I can't stand hearing that word debunked anymore. I'm like, but it's been debunked. It's not true. It's just not.
Right.
Just dig in a little. Stop following your echo chamber and dig in. This guy did nothing. And when you see the retweets, they always just find a way to kind of oversimplify the problem and say, look, this guy switched the votes, period. And now his life is destroyed.
Right.
But yeah, in the suit, he does specifically state, you have basically destroyed my career and I will have a very hard time working in this industry anymore because everybody will call me into question. Everybody knows me. Although I don't know how many people do. I think this will, hopefully they've backed off a little bit and that might be the end of it. I don't know.
Interesting. Yeah. I think there needs to be a lot more legislation passed to protect people in these situations. And especially when, there's just so much false information out there about them. These are people that are just working their normal jobs. I mean, can you imagine that? Like having to start all over again after working in a career for like 15 or 20 years and you have to start all the way at the bottom again. And especially now.
Oh yeah. And this guy, he's in his probably 40s, 50s. And so what are you going to start over and make this much money doing?
Exactly. That's just it. It's like, it's career ending stuff.
Mm-hmm. Career ending. It's over, which is why he's suing them. Just because he's like, I'm going to get you because you just made me lose out on potentially hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of income,
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's Eric Coomer. It's a really sad story. And he comes out. So he went on CNN and he spoke out against this person. And he said, listen, this is not what happened. I don't have any association with this. I have every right to say what I want to say on Facebook. And we all have our political opinions. I just think it's sad that you need so much money or a threat to sue somebody in order to get them to shut up about you. Why do these things spread like such wildfire? Such psychology in that,
Right. Yeah, definitely. Super terrible. I know. They get you every time.
They do. Rumor.
Yep.
It makes me think twice now about when I hear something about somebody. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, let's fact check that.
Yeah. But then again, I find myself being like, still reading something and I'm horrified and I'll be like, share without, because you're in a mood or you're like just frustrated and you're just like, God, the world, and you want to blame it on somebody. And it's so easy to blame it on Trump and all but this is going to go on long after he leaves. I think he fuels the flame a lot, but.
Right.
Anyway, so that's Eric Coomer.
Oh man. Poor Eric.
Yep. We're thinking about you, Eric.
Yeah, we are. That sucks.
Since Election Day, various guests, attorneys, and elected officials have appeared on Newsmax and offered opinions and claims about Smartmatic and Dominion systems. And Newsmax would like to clarify its news coverage and note that it has not reported as true. Newsmax has found no evidence. No evidence has been offered that Dominion or Smartmatic used software or reprogrammed software that manipulated votes in the 2020 election.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to Real Talk. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen. We look forward to having you on our next one.